Welcome to Freethought Matters. I'm Laurie Gaylor.
And I'm Dan Barker. We're executive directors of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, which produces this public affairs show. Our guest today is Tia Levings, author of the best-selling memoir, A Well-Trained Wife, about her escape from Christian patriarchy.
The Freedom from Religion Foundation, which produces Freethought Matters, is the nation's largest association of free thinkers. That's atheists, agnostics, and other non-believers. We invite you to join us in our vital work to keep our secular government free from religious influence. Become a member at FFRF.org or ask for a complimentary copy of our newspaper, Freethought Today. Freedom depends on freethinkers. Watch prior episodes of Freethought Matters on FFRF's YouTube channel.
Why would someone need to escape from Christian patriarchy in 21st century America? Our guest today, Tia Levings, will tell us why. Tia Levings is author of the best-selling book, A Well-Trained Wife, My Escape from Christian Patriarchy. Tia Levings' videos over social media have millions of viewers.
After escaping a patriarchal Christian marriage, she is now shining a light on the abuses of fundamentalism and helping others who have endured religious trauma. Most importantly, Tia is warning the rest of us that Christian nationalists and fundamentalists intend to run our country the same way they run their families. And having read Tia's book, that's thoroughly alarming to me. Congratulations on your bestseller, and thanks for joining us today, Tia.
Thanks so much for having me and for this conversation.
Well, thank you for writing this book, and I couldn't put it down, and I imagine you're getting a lot of accolades.
Yeah, I am. I appreciate that it's landing so well with readers. It's a vulnerable work, and you don't know exactly how it's going to be received. So hearing that that it's compelling and that it's relatable has been very important.
It's almost like there's this secret in our country under our nose, and nobody even knows about what's going on.
That's right.
You write that your family first joined a megachurch in Florida when you were 11 years old, and you say that this megachurch groomed you. What do you mean by that?
It was an intentional choice of words. Grooming prepares an eventual victim of high control. And my upbringing definitely hit all of that criteria for using that model. So I also was very intentional in beginning that in that place in my story, because when I got married, like a lot of people are tempted to look at my story and think, oh, it started when you met your husband. But no, there are reasons why I accepted that marriage, walked into that marriage, why I was ready for it. And that preparation process happened in that church, which was a very mainstream, run-of-the-mill Southern Baptist church, which might be surprising to some people who also hear that more extreme parts of my story and think, oh, well, it must be a fringe cult or something unusual, an aberration, not part of normal society. No, it was very mainstream. My pastor was the president of the Southern Baptist Convention, and we had 20,000 people on the roll. So it was ordinary in the 90s in many ways.
But what was the preparation? What do you mean by grooming? Did they teach you certain things, or what?
Yeah, so like when you think about raising a child, especially through the teenage years, you're thinking about, in general, I think, outside of religion, you're thinking of preparing them for the world, helping them with child development. You're maybe relying on experts and pediatricians and scientific evidence, testimonial, things that we know work to raise children to be ready for adulthood. The complete opposite happens in high control religion. And in my background, what they did to us was to basically constantly and very intentionally help us conform to being childlike adults, so that by the time we're 18, 19 years old, we're not autonomous people who are ready to face the world that we're going to be a part of and contribute to society. We are ready to become the one thing they've told us we're able to be. And everything in our thinking is on this narrow path. So we have shut down autonomy, personal ambitions, any kind of educations, checks and balances, critical thinking, anything that would help us navigate the world. We have learned that you only turn to scripture, you only listen to your pastor, you only fulfill this one gender role, and your goal as a human being on this planet is to help other people convert to your religion and to take dominion, political dominion of the country and eventually of the world.
Wow.
So for you as a young woman, you were told, you were groomed that your role was to be a supportive wife. Is that right?
Yeah, complementarianism is the word that they use, or submissive wife. Supportive if we're in more mainstream environments, but yeah, we'll use supportive.
So evangelical pastor Bill Gothard comes up a lot in your book. And who is Bill Gothard, and what kind of Christianity did he espouse, and how did that affect you personally?
Yeah, that's a great question, an important one. And I'm going to refer back to something you said, Dan, about hiding in plain sight, this kind of movement that's in plain sight. That was Bill Gothard's whole MO. So basically, he's this guy from Indianapolis, from Chicago area, and he started a ministry in the late 70s. And they were to help people solve their problems using biblical principles. And he spread his ideas through stadium events. So if you think of large, like Billy Graham style crusades, people would come to these big biblical conferences, and they would learn these biblical principles that they would apply to their practical families. And they came from all kinds of different denominations. So this wasn't a specific like Baptist movement or Pentecostal movement or anything like that. It was people were coming from all over, and then they would go back into their churches and recruit from within more Gothard followers. And so what this looked like was kind of a more devout way to be a Christian. They were choosing an alternative lifestyle. They were homeschooling when it was very, very unusual to homeschool, still very fringe movement there. They were not using contraception. They were trying to have a quiver full of children, which meant it's from a verse in the Bible that says, children are like arrows unto the Lord, and happy is the man who has his quiver full. So you want as many arrows as possible when you're going into war. You would want as many children as possible if you're trying to take dominion in an ideological war against the West. And so we identified these families because they had lots of children. They dressed in a very hyper modest kind of prairie aesthetic way. And they were willing to be different, even more different than we were. We were already different in the world because we were Christians, but they were ready to be different even within our congregation. So they recruited from inside, and they got a lot of respect in a mainstream congregation like ours. They moved up into leadership, and through the 80s and the 90s, this movement grew like wildfire.
And I have seen a chart, a Gothard chart, that shows God at the top, like a pyramid, and then Jesus, and then man, and then woman. I mean, isn't that, that's their hierarchy?
Yeah, you're referring to the umbrella of authority, which is this really wonky illustration where the rain kind of still penetrates each level, but it's not very good from an illustration standpoint. But the idea is patriarchy. All power flows through the man, and it is the idea is that God's on top and the man's going to shelter everyone below. That's not really how it works, but that's the model that we were taught.
You did what you were groomed to do, and you married young. But before we ask you about that, we'd like to play this short clip of you being interviewed on the Amazon Prime docuseries, Shiny Happy People, about the Duggar family.
In this culture, you are not really allowed to say no to who shows up and says they want you. If a man says he wants you, then he's God's man for you, and you have to learn how to adjust your feelings and thoughts around that. So by the time I was an 18-year-old woman, I had fully expected to just be nothing more than a submissive wife and mother.
So,
Wow.
Tia, can you tell us more about that Christian patriarchal marriage you entered into?
Yeah, every time I see younger me, I'm like, oh, you just meant so well. It really was a perfect storm because I was a good kid who wanted to please people. I wanted to do the right thing. I wanted to please God. I wanted my people to be happy with me. And to this temperament comes this environment and then this agenda. So it really was a whole thing. And in our church, separate of Bill Gothard, still rising in the evangelical movement, was this purity culture where we were, obviously emphasized to not have sex before marriage, be very modest. And the not having sex before marriage thing was the most important thing. And it was the only sex education that we were practically given. The idea of being just a virgin bride was so essential that you needed to have a very short engagement. So both of our pastors had 2-week engagements. They talked about this frequently in sermons, that there was no reason to have a long engagement. You only needed as much time as it took to plan the wedding, which didn't need to be that fancy when we had weddings every Friday and Saturday at First Baptist. So the infrastructure was already in place. There wasn't a lot of planning that had to be done. And so the short engagements would keep you virgin is the whole thing. They didn't talk to us about compatibility or chemistry or what abuse looks like or what red flags might look like. Or they just constantly emphasize that if you have problems, you have the rest of your life to work it out. And girls were taught taught's a light word. It was emphasized that if a man shows up and says, "I'm God's will for your life," you don't question that. That's he's speaking because he's a male. He has word from God. You can trust that that's actually true. So that's what happened to me. I met somebody and he said, "I'm God's will for your life." And I had been taught to accept that. And so I did. And so I tried to kind of retrofit myself on this person that I wasn't actually that attracted to, and I didn't know it all. And it was going way too fast for my personal timeline. Which wasn't a factor. That didn't matter. It's the get to the altar as fast as possible.
Wow, so you didn't really have any say in that, really, your own personal choices. Doesn't this go back to the biblical idea that females are property of the male, and the male wants to have his perfect property?
Yeah, that's a really big theme in Christian patriarchy. In my particular situation, it was missing because my father wasn't this way. My parents were just normal Midwestern Americans who took their kids to church. They really believed the marketing that we would, if we were there a lot, we would be safe, we'd be happy, we'd have good social lives. There was nothing wrong at church. They were trusting and naive that way, and there was a lot of marketing being spent to convince parents of that. So in my particular case, I didn't have a father who was telling me that this was the thing to do, and he wasn't arranging my situation for me, and they weren't courtship parents, but other parents were. And in the movement itself today, courtship is a big feature.
We're talking with Tia Levings, author of the best-selling memoir, A Well-Trained Wife.
Hi, I'm Ron Reagan, an unabashed atheist.
When I first recorded that commercial back in 2014, being openly atheist in America was still fairly uncommon. Today, the fastest growing religious group in the country is the non-religious, especially among the young. That progress is heartening, but the religious pushback is fierce and the forces of Christian nationalism are well organized. Our progress won't continue unless we work together so that reason and our secular constitution will prevail. That's why I'm asking you to join the Freedom from Religion Foundation, the nation's largest and most effective association of atheists and agnostics working to keep state and church separate, just like our founders intended. Please join the Freedom from Religion Foundation today. Ron Reagan, lifelong atheist, not afraid of burning in hell.
My name is Gabrielle Hinahara, and I'm an atheist because I believe in the power of doing good for the sake of doing good, and not because some divine entity tells you what is good and what's not, and not because you think it will get you into some sort of heavenly afterlife. I believe in human morality, which is why I think that most cultures across the world have come to the kind of same basic principles and values, such as the Golden Rule, which isn't based in religion, but is based in human interactions and mutual respect. And I think a lot of people turn to religion because it makes the choice of morality really easy, black and white, right and wrong, and you don't have to decide which is which. And in my experience as being an atheist through my life, I've found that moral choices are something that I think about a lot more than a lot of other people because nobody's telling me the answer. And since I don't believe in an afterlife, pretty much my whole meaning in life is based on my interactions with other people and that I can leave this world a better place by my actions.
Welcome back to Freethought Matters. We're talking with best-selling author Tia Levings, author of the book A Well-Trained Wife.
So Tia, you went into this, I guess that amounts to an arranged marriage. You went into this marriage and you had 5 children, and how were you expected to raise those kids?
Outside of the regular culture, one of the things so I had been a nanny as a young woman, and I knew basic infant care. I wasn't worried about how to take care of a child. And I had always wanted pretty big family. So it's one of the things I say frequently is it's very convenient when you want for yourself what the patriarchy wants for you. And so we were kind of in alignment here. I was like, okay, I can go along with this. This is what I can do this. How I was supposed to raise them was in the nurture and admonition of the Lord is the statement. What that actually means is that you're going to do it according to the group's ideals. And in order to have a quiver full of children, you have to do a lot of different things to provide for them, raise them, adjust your family management to that many people, accept different things in your mind that helps your body, just your physical body, get into the mindset of bearing child after child after child. So there's a lot of practices things that parents might just take for granted and say, oh, like, for example, last week I was talking about car seats. You might take for granted that you need to have enough car seats for your children. J.D. Vance just made a statement that said the reason why the birth rate was reduced was because of car seat laws. That's a direct
Wow.
dog whistle to fundamentalists of the fundies behind that see that quiverful families are having a hard time putting all of their children in car seats. You can't fit that many car seats in an ordinary car. These regulations are making it hard for them to let God decide their family size. And so there's these like hoops you have to go through in order to do this counterculture thing.
So let's talk about the violence. You write, when I went through the hell of church-sanctioned violence, I felt alone, and I wasn't. There are thousands of others out there. What kind of violence did you experience? What's in the movement? And how does religion play into that?
Yeah, this is a really important part of the whole story. In fact, New York Mag today has a piece out on the corporal punishment end of the obsession that evangelical families have with corporal punishment. And the reason why it's so essential is because you cannot get the kind of conformity that they need without really strict discipline like that. So you have of kind of a focus. I call everything I went through, I call it church-sanctioned domestic abuse, because the church said that it was okay. My church leadership said it was okay. Pastors and books and teachers were all, coming together and saying, this is how you should raise your family. And it includes really strict discipline of babies. There's a practice called blanket training where you start switching an infant as soon as they're able to crawl off of a blanket. That's explicitly described in Michael Pearl's work. I was also subjected to wife discipline, which is spanking wives the same as you would a child, because in federal marriage, which is Doug Wilson's view, a father is accountable before God for everything that happens in his household, including his wife's thoughts and deeds. So if he can't control what she's thinking and doing, then he's going to have to answer to God for that. So in order to have that level of control, you have to have some sort of dominance procedure in place. So those are two structured examples. What is also true is all of the erratic domestic abuse, emotional abuse, spiritual abuse, financial abuse, control that is part of that environment is all present. Marital rape is a big problem because there's no consent, and just erratic moods. Psychological health was a big part of my story as well. We weren't allowed to use doctors, so there's a lot that goes into that violent situation.
I met Doug Wilson. He and I did a couple of debates, and not only does he think wives can be beaten, he even said slaves should be beaten.
Well, he thinks there should be slaves then?
Yeah, he agrees with the New Testament, right. Everything goes back to the Bible.
Yes.
Your husband went from being a Gothard disciple to embracing something called Calvinism and covenant marriage. Did your husband really demand that you call him my Lord? And what about his encouragement to spank wives?
Yeah, that's all from Doug Wilson. My Lord is in Doug Wilson's book, Federal Marriage. It's so hard sometimes to describe it to outsiders. Doug Wilson's entire vision is like a castle. It's like a fiefdom. He has his own press, his own college, his own church, his own town. He has this idea of like a property dominance that permeates everything, and it's in all of his work. There's also a lot of misogyny in his work. So he has this idea, you know, that you're going to refer to your higher as my lord, and it's not my lady in return. It's, you know, it's not like we're playing medieval times here. It's a sign of deference and worship, husband worship. And I mean, yeah, it's all true. I mean, I don't know how to answer the question exactly. Yeah.
We don't want to give away the whole book. You had a very harrowing escape from your husband, and people are going to have to read the book, I think. You had a very long recovery. And you wrote in your book that Christian patriarchy has a strategy and a plan as they shelter abuses, riding on the assumption that no one knows what's going on behind closed doors and using religious freedom as an umbrella shield. True suffering is happening. Slavery, rape, trafficking, child neglect, medical neglect, baby abuse, and more as they prepare for their holy war. And this is quite a statement. So we want to talk about that. But first, maybe your recovery, how long this has taken?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm pretty open about this, and my second book is called The Soul of Healing, which is the story of my healing, but it's a self-help book, so it's for other survivors of religious trauma, because my inboxes are full of me too. Like I said this hard thing, and I told this hard truth of these secrets behind closed doors, but I'm not unusual. There are many, many, many women going through the same thing, or having just gotten out and they're not really sure how to put themselves back together. So my recovery was 10 years plus of intense trauma therapy, and kind of a tenacity to reclaim my life so I would still have something to tell of my life. I didn't want those years to be the entirety of my legacy and experience. I also really felt convicted that only somebody who's on the inside can tell you what it's like. And there are very few people who survive it and then they get to a place in their therapy that they can talk about it without re-traumatizing themselves, and that they can write. So since I had that, I felt like I have to try to tell people what this is like, because everything I ran away from is coming. Like, it's in our government now. So it's not like I ran away from it, I escaped it, and now it's done. It's right here front and center in our headlines in our election. This election is so vital. So yeah, my recovery was intense. I was shattered. I was shattered in 2007 and in shock, and the language for religious trauma didn't really exist yet. The deconstruction movement as we know it today is social media, all of that wasn't in place yet. So it was kind of like growing up together and healing together, and it's been intense.
With your children, you mean?
In general,
yeah.
Globally.
And one of the things you've talked about is this baby talk that women...
Baby.
What
baby
is that?
fundy?
Baby fundy. And you said you had to have therapy, voice therapy?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in this environment, which is also kind of overlaps culture. So if you're familiar with how Southern women talk, there's a lot of blur of which came first, the culture or the fundamentalist teaching. This idea that you're supposed to remain childlike is promoted in works like Fascinating Womanhood, which is a book that's been in print since 1963. And it teaches women to modulate their voices so they sound like young children. They're not threatening. They're hyper feminine. And it became a talking point when Katie Britt used it as her State of the Union response. She used this breathy, childlike, very strangely emotive voice that felt manipulative. And people were like, why is she talking like that? Because we've heard her talk like an adult in other contexts. But in this speech in her kitchen, she's lulling us with this baby voice. And Michelle Duggar, if you're familiar with the show 19 Kids and Counting and the Duggar family, Michelle Duggar also talks like a baby. So that's how we did. We called it Keep Sweet. We called it Speak with a Gentle Feminine Voice. But it was meant to encourage people to do what we needed them to do and to speak in a non-threatening way. And it doesn't sound like an adult woman, and it doesn't sound like ourselves as we mature. So when I came out, to sound like myself and reclaim my voice, I had to actually work with therapists just so I could discover what I sound like when I'm not when I'm not modulating as a baby.
Don't you think this goes back to the biblical teaching that we are all damned worms, no good, we can't think for ourselves, we have to submit or else we're going to be punished, and that whole damage that it does to your self-image?
Yeah, that's been a lot of the recovery work too, actually. Especially the Calvinistic veins of my years there. That is the total depravity that you're describing. And it's, you're a worm. You're not worth saving, but the only way you can be saved is if God actually sheds his blood for you. And you're told this as a very young child. So the little wrongs that you do as a little child, put Jesus on the cross and you filthy rag creature, even with that salvation, you're still nasty. That really gets into your psyche. And it's very hard to reclaim just a mental image that you were born good, you were born innocent, that your needs were not sinful, that you deserve to be loved and attached, properly have attachments and properly developed, and that's all deep work.
So you have done a number of videos. We've run out of time to show one of them, but people can go to TikTok. You also have a cheat sheet on Christian patriarchy. How can people find all of this?
Yeah, TiaLevings.com is the central hub. Everything is there. Also, TiaLevings.substack.com is where I actively deconstruct fundamentalism in our culture and headlines and entertainment. And Tia Levings Writer is my social media handle on all the platforms.
I like that cheat sheet. It summarizes all of these people you talk about. And what does this fundamentalist word mean? And what is that? It's a very handy thing. It's TiaLevings.com. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Wow.
And parting words, warnings for the American public about what the Christian patriarchal movement has in store for us.
Yes, their whole model is the family. So if you want to know how they're going to run the country, you have to look at how they run their families. It's very authoritative and top down. It's very restrictive, and women and children have no vote, no say, no power.
Well, thank you so much, Tia, for sharing your experiences and for writing a very important memoir. The memoir is called A Well-Trained Wife. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you for watching Freethought Matters.
Because free thought matters.